other places. So we started research on the heart, modeling the heart function a few years ago in Lausanne, and now we are basically conducting it in Milano, the Polytechnique of Milano. So we started long ago with external circulation, meaning that we aimed at describing the blood flow, basically the fluid dynamics of blood in arteries. So this is one of the very first simulation that we carried out. This is a carotid bifurcation, and you see here the fluid flow in the carotid artery and the interaction with the compliant vessel wall. It's actually a fluid structure interaction problem, and those are the equations. We write the Navier-Stokes equations in the lumen. Then we have two equations, one for the momentum equation with two variables. One is UF, which is the fluid velocity, and the other is P, which is the fluid pressure. And we have an extra term here, which is W, and W is the rate of deformation of the geometry. We're actually solving the problem in a deformable domain, so we need to introduce this additional variable. This is the momentum equation, this is the continuity equation, conservation of mass. Then we have an equation for the vessel wall, which is moving, which is deforming, and this is in a Lagrangian framework. Eta hat S denotes the displacement in a reference domain that we call omega hat, and then we have to reconstruct at every single time the geometry, the shape of the lumen. So we need a third equation. It could be a Laplacian equation, the harmonic extension of the displacement on the wall. It could be another equation, say. So we have three equations: fluid dynamics, structural mechanics, and the geometrical problem. And then we need to connect all those variables together, and we do it through the kinematic condition, saying that at the endothelin interface, the velocity field from the fluid side is equal to the derivative in time of the displacement of the wall. And then we have the conservation of the equilibrium of between the forces. The force exerted by the fluid on the wall is balanced by the one exerted by the wall on the fluid, and eventually we have this adherence condition. There is no cavitation, say. So this is the global system, and of course you need to go through a suitable numerical approximation in order to be able to get the results. So this is one example of simulation. This is the ascending aorta. This is the time step. There are two heartbeats here, and you see the pressure and the streamlines. You see the displacement of the wall goes from 0 to 4 millimeters, which is say a large deformation in this case, and then you see the straight lines. Now, when you want to go to a more general view by accounting for the old circulation, then we resorted to what we call the geometric multiscale method, namely the interaction between a three-dimensional fluid or three-dimensional, say, fluid structure interaction, when we want to go into the fine details. Otherwise, you use a one-dimensional models for the most important arteries and veins in the body, and eventually for the say peripheral circulation, we use the analogy with electrical circuits. So this is an interplay between 3D, 1D, and 0D, say, order differential equations that allows us to simulate basically all the arterial circulation. You see, you have the three-dimensional details here, and then this is coupled with one-dimensional description for about 100 arteries, and in the peripheral places we use zero-dimensional models to account for peripheral resistances, say. Now, for the heart, well, I think that there's already been many comments on the heart modeling. Let me just point out what we would actually like to describe mathematically. We'd like to describe hopefully the whole heart function, meaning that we need to start from the electric potential, which is generated from the sinoatrial node, and then down to description of the ionic activity, then the mechanical activation of every single myofilament, and then the active and passive mechanics, at the global myocardium level, and you see all those blocks exchange information, and those are physical information. They exchange quantities. Of course, everything is connected with everything else. Then, of course, we go to the fluid dynamics in the 4 chambers, the 2 atria and the 2 ventricles, and ideally we should like to simulate the aortic and mitral valve behavior, and to connect the whole thing to the external circulation and to the local circulation with the lung, say. Now, mathematically speaking, this is the model. We have, say, for the left ventricle, we have this monodomain or bidomain problem for the electrophysiology, which describes the extracellular and intracellular potential, the ionic gating variables, W, that tell us if, well, they have a binary value that equal to 1 if the ion channel is open, or 0 otherwise, and C is the concentration of the different species may like to consider, like calcium, potassium, and so on and so forth. And then we have, say, a system of nonlinear diffusion reaction equation. And the nonlinear terms come from the reaction term, and this is due to the activity that we have at the cellular level. So we have a system of ordinary differential equations that has already been mentioned several times this morning, and the size depends on how many variables we want to account for here. So this is the first part, which describes the electrophysiology. Then we have an ordinary differential equation that provides us with gamma F. Gamma F is the rate of deformation of every single fiber. Then we have the mechanical deformation, and here we have the passive and the active mechanics. So we have a system of, say, nonlinear hyperbolic equations with different type of constitutive laws. Then you have the fluid dynamics with the Navier-Stokes equations in the ventricle, say. And then you may have different type of models for the valves. Now, this in principle should be replicated for every chamber. So for the 2 ventricles and the 2 atria, and then connected with external circulation. This is, say, the integrated R model. Of course, there is no analysis for that. It's too complicated. Well, there is only very partial analysis for some of the core models under very restricted assumptions. So we can, I guess, unfortunately say today that we are solving a problem numerically. We want to solve this problem numerically, but we are not really sitting on a safe ground, right, mathematical ground. We do not have any say, rigorous theorem that tell us that this system has a solution, and in fact it has a solution because we are living organism, right? So we have to trust us. We are not yet at the level of having a possibility of generating the geometry for your heart. So we started from a kind of CAD, which is a zygote CAD model for the heart, and of course the very first thing is that you need a grid. You need a grid for the fluid dynamics in the ventricles and in the atria, and then you need a grid for the structural mechanics, the passive and active mechanics, and the electrophysiology, and this is the grid for the myocardium. The 2 grids may be of different size because the characteristics time and the characteristic, say, scale, spatial scale, are very different for the different type of physics that we are trying to connect together. There is a lot of detail. And in principle, you should be able to account for those details, to treat them carefully. Otherwise, the result that we are going to produce is not necessarily correct. About the size of the grid, it really depends on what we want to observe. Here are 2 different grids. One is, say, coarse grid with 800,000 elements, and the other one is a finer grid with 20 million elements. The computational costs are prohibitive for the fine grid, and there is a lot of room for improving the computational efficiency of the algorithms. And there's still a lot that at least we in our group have to do in this respect. Here are some examples. Some of them you have already seen this morning in different courses in different contexts. But this is an example of, say, the electrophysiology in the left atrium. What we see here is the simulation of two ectopic stimuli beside the one which is the natural one. And you see the formation of these 8 re-entry. Doctors call them sometimes the, say, the electrical chaos. Maybe it's not that correct physically, but it helps us making a, say, qualitative idea. This is a ventricle that is contracting, and it's actually a ventricle that is subject to, that features a scar. It's a large scar here, a small one there, and a medium one there, and we see correspondingly the way the stroke volume changes. The stroke volume is measured here by this line, the length of this line that is connecting this, say, pressure volume loop, and we see that for a regular healthy ventricle, the stroke volume is the one that is identified by the black margins, while the others with different colors refer to the large, the ventricle with a large scar, and with an intermediate one and with a small one. So the reduction of the stroke volume, which is basically the volume of blood ejected by the ventricle, is quite substantial here, due to the fact that the ventricle is not contracting in a correct way. And here we find some numbers for that. Of course, we can make simulations. Of course, you have to trust the model, right? And you have to ideally to verify and to validate here, as we have learned before. Here we are simulating an LBBB situation, which is the block of the left bundle branch, and we see the potential here. In millivolt, we see gamma F. Maybe we see it again. Yeah, we see the potential. We see the gamma F here, which is the rate of deformation of the different myofilaments, and then we see the displacement in the lower part. These are biventricular simulations. We can then see the way the fluid dynamics behave in the ventricle and in the atrium. These are simulation on a, say, idealized left heart. We see the 4 pulmonary veins that bring blood, oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium, and then this passes through this valve, which is the mitral valve, into the left ventricle, and then through the ventricle it's ejected, say, from the ventricle it's ejected through the aortic valve into the main aorta. So here are 5 seconds of heartbeat, and you see the velocity field here, and you see the say the so-called Q criterion that is highlighting the coherent structure that we have in this context. This takes forever. This takes for a week on a big cluster just to simulate 1 second. So this goes for say more efficient algorithms. This is yet another example. This is the upper part of the ventricle, and this is the ascending aorta. And this is the aortic valve with the 3 leaflets. And this is just one simulation of the sudden opening and closing of the 3 leaflets. You have the velocity on the left-hand side and the pressure on the right-hand side. And this is the same simulation. Now we are just reporting the peak velocity from the left-hand side and the Q criterion with the formation of this big coherent vortex say that is entering into the ascending aorta. Now I would like to point out a couple of things that they've been working on in these past few years, and these are purely on the numerical level. Often when we treat this type of multi-physics problem, we have different type of physics. There is the interplay between different grids. You generate geometrical grid in an independent way, say, and of course, most typically, those grids do not agree at the interface. This is the aortic arch, and you see here the grid that is used for the lumen and the grid that is used for the vessel wall. So we need to match not necessarily the grid, that is non-conforming, and we want to keep it non-conforming, but the different variables that are computed on the different domains. And here is just a mathematical, say, simplification of what we are actually doing. We are actually considering two different type of completely different type of approximations and grid. These are two domains, two rectangular domains. We use one grid here and a different grid there. We use one approximation here and a totally different approximation there. So here we can think of using linear finite elements, and here we can think of using a high order spectral element method with very high degree, high polynomial degree, and we want to match information across this interface. And the way we do it is to use two different interpolation operators, one from the left and the other from the right. And this is the way we use them. For the fluid structure interaction, in the kinematic condition, we say that the velocity on the left-hand side, say, the fluid velocity is the interpolation of the rate of deformation of the vessel wall. This is pi fs, so we go from S, which is the structure, to the fluid. This is the first interpolant, and then we need a second interpolant, which is pi sf, from fluid to the structure, for say, matching the stresses. And you see here there is also the presence of the mass matrix at the interface, and the mass matrix from the fluid side, and the mass matrix at the interface from the structural side. So those are important to make sure that you have conservation of the normal stresses, say. And then in the adherence condition, we have again this structural to fluid interpolation operator. So this is the only difference. Those red interpolant, which then translate into rectangular matrices, those are the only say, modification that we have to implement on a code that is actually implementing the fluid structure interaction. So it's a very mild modification from the I would say implementation point of view, but it's safe from the mathematical point of view, because you can show not on this big problem, but on a simpler elliptic coupling that you have an error estimate which is optimal in the sense that the error between the computed solution and the exact solution is additive with respect to the errors that you make in the two subdomains, in the two subregions. And you can then sum up two optimal error estimate in one domain and the other domain. Otherwise said, you are not polluting the solution from one side because of the fact that you are using interpolation operators from the other side. Now there is another issue, which is the way you solve this problem numerically. Well, we tend to use monolithic methods, meaning that we want to solve the problem globally, and this is because of course it is more computation intensive, but it's a bit safer from the mathematical standpoint because you have stable methods, and you don't have splitting error that can affect your error. But this brings you to a big Jacobian matrix after linearization, and you have the different type of physics, the structure, the geometry, and the fluid. And of course, if you have in the heart, you also have the electrophysiology and the valve, say. Now, this is a coupled matrix, coupled system, and we decouple it, first of all, by using a kind of generalization of the LU factorization. You want to generate blocks or factors that depend only on one physics, and then we want to go into that physics and using optimal domain decomposition algorithms or optimal algebraic multigrid methods, say, in order to recover something which is hopefully scalable. This is just one example. It's a kind of simple computation, fluid structure interaction in a bypass, in a femoral bypass, say, and we see we use two different grids. One is coarse with 20 million elements, and the other is fine with 150 million elements. And you see the way, say, in the fine grid, the scalability behaves. You go down linearly, so this is perfectly scalable, optimally scalable, up to a certain number of cores. In this case, it's 4,000 cores, and then of course you lose the scalability because you don't have enough degrees of freedom to feed your computation at a different course. Of course, if you increase the number of degrees of freedom, this could keep going down linearly, say. So having optimal solvers and scalable solvers is, of course, very important. Now, I was mentioning before that these computations are very expensive, and a way that we use to reduce the complexity is model order reduction. And here is just a kind of cartoon that explains the way we behave, we use it. Now, assume that, well, first of all, we want to distinguish the computation offline from that online. Now, offline, assume that you have many different characters, many different, say, patients, and assume that you have enough time to make very intensive high-fidelity computation for every single patient. Okay, this might take forever, say, this might take very long, but once you have those computations, you can use them to generate a basis for a subspace whose dimension now is the size of, is the number of elements that have been computing beforehand. So instead of using, say, 200 million unknowns, now use 100 unknowns. If you have 100 patients, say, you generate subspace of dimension 100, and then we have a new patient or a new subject. You can solve the same problem with the same physics, with the same mathematical model. However, instead of using, say, linear finite element, a generic functions, basis function that are problem indifferent, we use these previously computed solutions. So these are online simulation that in principle could take for a few minutes, could be real time, or almost real time, whereas that one is offline and it might be extremely expensive. Now, how do you account for variability? Well, we had two beautiful lectures at the early this morning from Professor Mirams and Professor Niederer, but you know, this is just a super simplification. The variability affects the geometrical data, the shape, say, the biological data, the elastic properties, the conducibility of myocardium, for instance, and the functional data, boundary conditions or initial conditions, say. How do you deal with uncertainty? Again, we have different type of uncertainties as we have learned this morning, but ideally we'd like to integrate all error sources in the process and quantify their impact on the model outcome. Then we'd like to improve the statistical significance of confidence of the conclusion drawn from numerical simulations. How can we trust a numerical model? We have seen the lecture before, and then to calibrate to produce patient-specific simulations. Now, of course, we know that if we mistake, we may have very serious consequences. We may experience very serious consequences. And this is one example where I've been reconstructed the intramural fiber orientation with two different algorithms, and we end up with, say, displacement which is quite different one from the other. So this is the approach that we try to follow. This is just one example. We start from the pre-processing with segmentation plus meshing, and then we use a forward model to compute the electrophysiology. We use sensitivity analysis and forward UQ for parameter selection, and then for personalization we use parameter estimation and the backward UQ, and these in principle should allow us to make prediction. This is the global picture. We use simulation to solve forward problem. We use control to optimize specific other devices or specific operations. We use forward UQ to see the way uncertainty propagates into the solution from data to solution, say, and we use inverse UQ for parameter identification. And I'd like to conclude by saying that we started using say machine learning to train our model, and this we made different type of say applications so far. But let me just mention this one, which is still with the aim of reducing the computational complexity. We basically train our model, and this was the case for computing, say, the cellular activity. We train our model with high fidelity model. So we go from data to observation, and for that we use a high fidelity model, and of course then we construct this multilayer perceptron to find observation in a much shorter time. So this is the combination between high fidelity model-driven method and say low fidelity neural network-driven algorithm in order to solve the problem for say the sarcomere model. This is just one example, and this is a training over 100 samples, and each one took 1 second, and then with the test we end up with an error which is order of 10 to the power minus 2, and this is the neural network in action. And at the end, by solving a problem which is of much smaller dimension, we're able in this specific case to find the high fidelity solution, which is basically overlaid to the solution that we have been obtained with the neural network side. So this is one example where we try to combine the two approaches in order to speed up the solution of the high fidelity problem side. I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
I think in the interest of time, we'll probably have to ask any questions. One very quick one, if anyone has a quick question.
Very nice talk. Are you solving flow destruction interaction, or you solve the flow induced by the wall motion once you correct?
We do both. I mean, we solve fluid structure interaction in the arteries. For the heart, we solve both fluid structure interaction, or in the case we have a reasonable description of the motion on the wall, we only solve for the fluid. We have both things.
In order to resolve all the vertical structure, like the cohering vortices inside the cavity, so do you need to solve using like turbulence modeling as well?
Yeah, we're actually solving. We're actually using a large eddy simulation model, and with stabilization, which is based on variational multiscale method. The fluid is not turbulent. It's not. Well, say the turbulence is not fully developed, at least in healthy conditions, but it's in permanent transition to turbulence. So you actually need to use turbulence model.
What readings number do you solve for the fluid?
Say in the aorta is order 1200. In the heart is higher. It goes to 4000. In the healthy heart, the healthy ventricle.
Well, let's thank Alfio again.
Thank you.